Jessica Chambers was just 19 when she staggered out of her burning car, her body nearly consumed by flames, yet with her last breath, she tried to name her killer. What she said that night haunts investigators to this day, and despite arrests, trials, and national attention, the one who set her on fire still walks free. It was the kind of winter night that made people stay indoors. Cold winds swept through the quiet backroads of Cortland, Mississippi, a small town with just a few thousand residents and not much crime to speak of. But on the evening of December 6, 2014, something happened that would forever scar the community. At around 8 p.m., a 911 call came in reporting a car on fire near a remote stretch of Heron Road, not far from a wooded area. By the time first responders arrived, they saw a horrific sight: an entire vehicle engulfed in flames, lighting up the darkness like a warning beacon. But the real nightmare was yet to come. Just as firefighters began approaching the burning car, they noticed movement. Out of the black smoke and orange flames stumbled a girl, barefoot and disoriented, her body covered in burns. Her arms were outstretched, as if reaching for help. Her clothes had been mostly burned away, and her skin was charred, her hair almost completely gone. She was still alive, though barely. One responder later described her as a walking ghost. It was a sight they would never forget. That girl was 19-year-old Jessica Chambers, a local from the same quiet town. The responders were stunned, not just because she was still breathing, but because she tried to speak. With what little strength she had left, she reportedly tried to say something. The words were hard to make out. Some claimed she said a name, others thought it might have been a location or a plea for help. But whatever she said was barely audible, her lungs and throat scorched from the fire she had somehow escaped. Jessica was rushed to a hospital with burns covering over 98% of her body. Medical staff were in disbelief that she had survived even that long. Her family was called in, but by the time they arrived, she was already unconscious. A few hours later, she succumbed to her injuries. Doctors confirmed she had likely been doused in a flammable liquid and set on fire intentionally. The community's shock turned quickly into horror and confusion. Who would do such a thing to someone so young? And why? As news of her death spread, people gathered near the scene, laying flowers and lighting candles. Rumors swirled throughout the town. Some said it was gang-related. Others believed it was a jealous lover or a drug deal gone wrong. But no one knew for sure. There were no clear suspects, no arrests, and no explanation. The only clue investigators had in those early hours was whatever Jessica may have tried to say before she died. That mystery would become the center of the case, something that would be picked apart, replayed, and speculated on for years to come. The fire that killed Jessica Chambers didn't just destroy her car and body, it tore a hole through the heart of her community. What started as a routine emergency call quickly turned into one of the most disturbing and baffling murder cases Mississippi had ever seen. The fire was out, but the questions were just beginning to burn. Jessica Chambers was the kind of girl people noticed. With long blonde hair, bright eyes, and a smile that could light up a room, she seemed like any other small-town teenager. She grew up in Cortland, Mississippi, where life moved slowly and families stayed close. Her parents were divorced, but Jessica had a solid upbringing, especially under the watchful eye of her mother, Lisa, who always tried to keep her on the right path. Jessica was described by friends as outgoing, kind-hearted, and full of life. She had big dreams. She once talked about becoming a nurse, helping others, and leaving the small town behind for something bigger. But somewhere along the way, things began to change. After the tragic death of her older brother, who had been a huge part of her life, Jessica's world took a dark turn. She was devastated, and those close to her noticed that she began to drift. She stopped caring about school, lost interest in her goals, and started spending time with a different crowd. These were people known to local law enforcement, young men tied to drugs, guns, and street gangs. Jessica, once sheltered, suddenly found herself in the middle of a world she didn't fully understand. She became harder to reach, often sneaking out, staying away from home, and frequently changing her phone numbers. Her parents were worried, but Jessica was legally an adult, and like many teenagers, she insisted on making her own choices. She dated older men, some with criminal records. She started showing up in neighborhoods far from her own, hanging out with people who barely knew her but treated her like a badge of rebellion. Those who cared about her warned her she was getting in too deep, but Jessica didn't listen. Or maybe she just didn't know how to pull herself out. In the weeks leading up to her murder, Jessica had begun to act differently. She told her mother she was tired of the life she was living and wanted a fresh start. She was talking about enrolling in college courses and distancing herself from the people she once called friends. But as anyone who's ever tried to leave a dangerous crowd knows, walking away isn't always easy. Sometimes the people you turn your back on feel betrayed, and betrayal can come with consequences. Her phone records from the day of her death revealed several calls and texts to people connected to drugs and gangs. One number in particular stood out, someone she had been in regular contact with for weeks, but hadn't told her family about. Investigators would later discover that this person had ties to violent criminal activity, but when questioned, they denied any involvement and claimed Jessica had left them alone months earlier. As detectives began piecing together her final hours, it became clear that Jessica was straddling two worlds: the innocent life her family hoped she would return to, and the darker life she had become entangled in. Her desire to escape may have been genuine, but it may also have made her a target. Whoever killed Jessica likely knew her. They knew where she'd be, what she was driving, and how to catch her off guard. It raised a chilling possibility that the people she trusted were the ones who ultimately betrayed her. One of the most haunting details in the investigation of Jessica Chambers' murder was what she may have tried to say before she died. As first responders arrived on the scene that night, they were not only shocked by the sight of her burned body, but also by the fact that she was still alive. Barely able to walk, her skin blackened and peeling, Jessica was conscious for just a few moments before collapsing. But in those final moments, she tried to speak. Multiple firefighters and medics later testified that she attempted to say a name, possibly the name of her attacker. What she actually said remains one of the most controversial aspects of the case. Some responders claimed she said the name Eric, while others heard Derek, Jerry, or even Jermaine. Her mouth and throat were severely damaged by the heat and flames, making her speech difficult to understand. Still, the fact that she made an effort to communicate led investigators to believe that her final words could hold the key to solving her murder. Law enforcement began compiling a list of every man with a name similar to what she might have said. They combed through her phone contacts, text messages, social media profiles, and local police records, searching for Erics, Dereks, and anyone else who could be connected. Dozens of young men were brought in for questioning. Some were friends. Others were distant acquaintances or known gang members. A few had solid alibis. Others were vague and nervous. But none could be linked directly to the crime. The situation became even more complicated when it was revealed that Jessica often used different nicknames for people, and that many of her contacts were saved under false names or emojis in her phone. She had been known to change numbers frequently, making it harder for investigators to track her recent communications. To make things worse, her phone had been damaged in the fire, and some of its data was corrupted or lost. Still, forensic teams managed to extract partial information, revealing she had communicated with several people the day she died, including one last text just minutes before the fire was reported. The ambiguities surrounding her final words created division, not only among investigators but also among the public. Some believed she had clearly said Eric, and were convinced police were covering for someone. Others thought the responders, overwhelmed by the horror of the scene, had misheard what she said entirely. Without a recording or direct quote, there was no way to be certain. This single moment, though brief, would become the center of endless speculation. To this day, no official conclusion has been made about what Jessica tried to say in her last moments. That name or word could have been the answer to everything. But it was as if the truth died with her. The very clue that could have led to justice became another dead end. It's a chilling thought that she may have used her last breath to point to her killer, but no one could hear her clearly enough to save the case. 2 weeks after Jessica's death, when the grief was still fresh and the town remained on edge, investigators received a lead that reignited the case. It came in the form of a digital trail. Jessica's phone had pinged a cell tower in Batesville, a town about 15 miles away, less than an hour before the fire. This discovery raised new questions. What was Jessica doing in Batesville? Who was she meeting? And why hadn't she told anyone she was going there? Detectives quickly began pulling surveillance footage from businesses near the cell tower. Among the dozens of cameras, one video from a gas station caught their attention. In the grainy clip, timestamped around 7:26 p.m., Jessica was seen pulling into the station in her car. She stepped out, wearing a light-colored hoodie and sweatpants, walked inside briefly, and then returned to her vehicle. Everything about her behavior seemed numb, calm, casual, like she wasn't worried about anything. But behind her, another vehicle appeared on the footage, a dark SUV that seemed to pause before pulling out after her. Investigators reviewed the video over and over. The SUV's make and model couldn't be identified with certainty, and the license plate was blurred by glare. It was impossible to tell if the driver was male or female, but what stood out was the timing. Jessica left the gas station, and moments later the SUV followed. Was it a coincidence? Or was she being watched? The footage was shared internally among law enforcement, but not released to the public. They didn't want to compromise the investigation. Detectives tracked down everyone seen in the gas station during that time frame. Most were locals and cleared quickly, but the SUV remained a mystery. No one came forward. No one claimed to have seen it, and no matching vehicle had been reported stolen or missing. The evidence raised chilling possibilities. Perhaps Jessica had met someone at the gas station, someone she trusted enough to follow or give a ride to. Or maybe she never noticed she was being followed at all. If the person in the SUV was involved, it would mean her murder was premeditated, and her killer had been tracking her movements long before the final moment. Back in Cortland, detectives returned to canvass the route between Batesville and the location where Jessica's car was found burning. It was a rural, narrow road, flanked by trees and far from any homes or businesses. Someone had led her there, or forced her. Either way, it was the perfect spot to commit a crime unseen. Even with the new lid, there was no solid identification, no arrest, and no motive. The SUV was a ghost, real, yet unreachable. With each passing day, hope slipped further away. The footage showed Jessica's last known steps before her murder. It was a digital imprint of her final movements, captured by chance. But without more evidence, it only deepened the mystery and added another piece to a puzzle that refused to come together. Over a year after Jessica Chambers was laid to rest, the case had grown cold. Dozens of leads had been followed, countless interviews conducted, and volumes of evidence collected, yet no arrests had been made. The public grew frustrated, and Jessica's family became desperate for answers. Then, in a surprising development, investigators made an arrest that many hoped would finally bring justice. A man named Quentin Miles, a 27-year-old with a long criminal record, was taken into custody. The announcement shook the town once again. Quentin was no stranger to law enforcement. He had a history of violent behavior and drug activity and was known to associate with some of the same people Jessica had once been involved with. According to investigators, DNA matching Quentin's was found on the passenger side door handle of Jessica's car. It wasn't a full fingerprint or a blood sample, but it was enough to raise serious suspicion. The district attorney believed they had enough to press charges. Quentin was arrested and charged with capital murder. The news brought mixed reactions. Some believed law enforcement had finally caught the killer. Others were skeptical, pointing out that the case against Quentin appeared circumstantial. The strongest piece of evidence was that partial DNA match, something Quentin's defense argued could have easily come from a casual encounter weeks or even months before Jessica's death. There was no witness, no surveillance footage showing him with Jessica that day, and no confession. Still, prosecutors pushed forward, determined to hold someone accountable. The trial began nearly 3 years after Jessica's death. The courtroom was filled with reporters, family members, and curious locals. Jessica's mother sat in the front row every day, clutching a photo of her daughter. The prosecution laid out their case, highlighting Quentin's criminal past, his connection to known gang members, and the DNA evidence. They also presented cell phone data that placed Quentin in the general area on the night of the murder. It seemed, on the surface, like a strong case, but when it was the defense's turn, they attacked the foundation of the evidence. They pointed out that Quentin's phone had also pinged other locations that night, and that cell tower data was far from exact. They argued that no motive had been proven, and reminded the jury that the name Jessica supposedly uttered before dying didn't match Quentin's at all. No witness had seen him with her that day, and no one could place him at the scene of the fire. After days of emotional testimony and arguments, the jury deliberated. When they returned, they couldn't reach a unanimous decision. The result was a mistrial. Prosecutors tried again, launching a second trial months later, but it ended the same way: hung jury. Without a conviction, Quentin was released. He walked out of jail a free man, maintaining his innocence the entire time. The case was left in limbo. Jessica's family was devastated. The community, once again, was left without answers. An arrest had been made, but closure remained out of reach. The person who killed Jessica Chambers was still out there. Just when it seemed like the case of Jessica Chambers had faded from the headlines, a new twist reignited public interest. It began quietly, almost by accident. A freelance journalist working on a podcast about unsolved crimes filed a request for public records, hoping to uncover something missed in the early stages of the investigation. In the process, the journalist obtained a piece of surveillance footage that had never been made public. It came from a traffic camera located near the remote road where Jessica's car was found burning. The footage was blurry and grainy, but what it showed would once again throw the case into the spotlight. The video was time-stamped, just 10 minutes before the 911 call reporting the fire. Jessica's car was clearly visible, turning onto the rural stretch of road that would later become the scene of her murder. But what caught the attention of investigators and the public was another vehicle just seconds behind hers. A second car, dark and boxy, followed Jessica at a distance. It didn't pass her. It didn't turn off. It followed her into the shadows. This vehicle had never been mentioned before. The footage had gone unnoticed for years, buried in archives and overlooked during the chaos of the early investigation. The police had reviewed dozens of videos, but due to poor quality and lack of timestamps, this one had initially been dismissed. Now it became the center of a new theory. The second vehicle, was it the same dark SUV seen following her at the gas station in Batesville, and if so, was it the killer's car? Investigators reopened their review of camera footage across multiple highways and side streets, hoping to trace the vehicle's route, but no other video clearly captured its movements. It was as if the car had emerged from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. The license plate wasn't visible, and the make and model couldn't be confirmed. Still, this one brief glimpse challenged earlier theories. It suggested Jessica had been followed that night, possibly stalked by someone who knew her routine. The footage raised more questions than it answered. If someone had been following Jessica, how long had they been watching her? Was she lured to that road, or did she unknowingly lead her killer there? Had the person in the second vehicle been at the gas station earlier, waiting for the right moment? Despite the renewed attention, there were still no arrests. The video was not enough to identify a suspect, but it added a chilling new layer to the mystery. Someone had followed Jessica to the place where she would be set on fire and left for dead. Someone had been close enough to watch her final moments from just a few feet away. The new footage gave hope to Jessica's family, but it also deepened the pain. It was a reminder that the person responsible had been right there, possibly even known to her, and had gotten away with murder. Once again, the investigation surged forward, but the trail remained cold. In early 2023, nearly 9 years after Jessica Chambers was brutally murdered, the case took a turn that no one expected. A letter arrived at the Panola County Sheriff's Office from a prison inmate in Alabama. It was handwritten, messy and unsigned at first glance, but what it contained sent a wave of urgency through the department. The inmate claimed that his former cellmate, a man named Rico Slade, had confessed in detail to the murder of a teenage girl who had been burned alive in Mississippi years earlier. The description matched Jessica's case almost perfect. The letter stated that Rico had boasted about setting a white girl on fire because she had talked too much. The inmate said Rico even described the road she was found on, the gas station she stopped at, and the use of lighter fluid specifics that were never made public. The claims were chilling. The sheriff's department quickly verified the identities of both men and found that Rico had once lived in northern Mississippi before moving to Alabama. He had a history of gang ties and a violent criminal record. He had never before been linked to Jessica's case. Investigators moved fast. They arranged for Rico to be transported to Mississippi for questioning. He arrived in chains, calm, and appeared unconcerned. During hours of interviews, Rico denied knowing anything about Jessica Chambers. He said he had never heard of her, never been to Cortland, and had never confessed anything to anyone. But when pressed, he became cagey. He gave vague answers and contradicted himself on small details. Still, without a confession or physical evidence connecting him directly to the crime, investigators couldn't arrest him. To dig deeper, detectives re-examined Rico's past. They discovered he had been in Mississippi during the time Jessica was killed. He had family in Batesville, just miles away from where Jessica was last seen alive. More alarmingly, Rico had once driven a dark-colored SUV, similar to the one seen in the surveillance footage. But the vehicle had long since been sold and scrapped. Any potential forensic evidence was gone. The inmate who wrote the letter was brought in for a formal interview. He described Rico's alleged confession in more detail, claiming Rico had said he was angry at Jessica for snitching and that she had threatened to go to the police. Whether the story was true or an attempt to gain favor with authorities remained uncertain. Prison informants are often unreliable, but this one knew facts that were never released publicly. It couldn't be ignored. Despite the promising lead, no charges were filed. The evidence was still circumstantial, and Rico remained in prison on unrelated charges. But for many close to the case, it felt like the closest they had ever come to identifying the killer. If Rico was the one responsible, he had managed to evade justice for nearly a decade. The possibility that Jessica's killer had confessed behind prison walls, but would never face trial, was a painful thought. The case remained open, but hope was fading. It was a bitter reminder that even when the truth surfaces, justice is not always guaranteed. Today, the murder of Jessica Chambers remains one of the most disturbing and unresolved cases in recent Mississippi history. Nearly a decade has passed since that cold December night, yet the crime continues to haunt her family, the investigators who worked tirelessly on the case, and a community that was forever changed. Despite arrests, trials, and renewed investigations, no one has ever been convicted of her murder. Justice, it seems, is still out of reach. Jessica's mother still visits her grave regularly, decorating it with flowers and personal mementos. Each year on the anniversary of her death, friends and family gather to light candles and say prayers, hoping that one day the person responsible will be held accountable. The pain hasn't faded. If anything, the lack of closure has made it worse. It's not just the loss of a daughter, it's the knowledge that someone committed an unthinkable act and got away with it. Theories about who killed Jessica are still debated online and in true crime communities. Some believe she was targeted by gang members because she had information they didn't want shared. Others think it may have been a jealous ex-boyfriend or someone close to her who felt betrayed. A few even suspect she was lured by someone she trusted, someone who planned her murder in advance and knew exactly where to take her. But every theory seems to lead to another dead end. Despite the passage of time, law enforcement continues to review the case. New detectives occasionally take a fresh look. Forensic technology has improved, offering the slim possibility that new evidence could still be uncovered. But so far, nothing definitive has surfaced. The once promising leads have grown cold. The surveillance footage remains too blurry, the phone data too vague, and the witness testimonies too inconsistent to build a solid case. Even the most compelling lead, the prison inmate's claim that his cellmate confessed to the murder, failed to produce the results everyone had hoped for. Without a confession or physical evidence, prosecutors couldn't move forward, and so the man who may have known the truth remained behind bars for a different crime, untouched by Jessica's case. In the end, the story of Jessica Chambers is not just about a horrific crime. It's about a young woman whose life was cut short in the most brutal way imaginable. It's about a town that lost its sense of safety, and a family that lives every day with unanswered questions. It's a case that had everything: heartbreak, mystery, twists, and national attention, yet still no resolution. The name Jessica Chambers is now etched into true crime history, not because of justice served, but because of justice denied. Her final moments, her whispered words, her desperate struggle to survive, it all points to a truth that remains just out of reach. And until the person who took her life is finally named and convicted, the fire that ended Jessica's life will continue to burn in the hearts of those left behind.